It's from the Associated Press, Pew Research Center. A majority of Americans have heard of ChatGPT, but few have tried it themselves. And it says about 6 in 10 U.S. adults, 58%, are familiar with ChatGPT, though relatively few have tried it themselves, according to a Pew Research Center survey conducted in March. So I thought that was interesting from a couple of different things. First of all, 58%, maybe it's just the circles I go in, but that actually seems like kind of a low number right now to know about ChatGPT, which is pretty extraordinary. We're talking about a new technical application, however you want to call it, that came on the scene relatively recently. And like, I have not gone anywhere, spoken anywhere where people didn't know what it was. It's as common. If I'm on stage talking about this stuff, if I say ChatGPT, people nod their heads just as if I would have said Google or Facebook or something like that for the most extent. So the fact that 58% seems a little low, but then this thing that relatively few have tried it for themselves. Here's the thing that I find interesting about this, David, is that this looks an awful lot like what the internet looked like to me in the late 90s, where I would be on a college campus. Like, so I had heard of the internet before I went to college, sort of. We got to college and my roommate and I spent like half a day trying to hook up his computer, and it opened up and we both looked at each other and said, "What is Yahoo?" Which was the search engine that came up, right? And so then we like punched in a couple things in the search engine. Like, I think we searched for Jeeps because we were into 4-wheel drive vehicles and stuff like that. And we got like these couple pages, including an amphibious Jeep page. And we were like, I didn't know there was an amphibious Jeep. And we spent like, 4 hours setting it up and then like 30 minutes playing around with it. And we're like, all right, well, that was dumb. And then we went out and did something outside, right? But by the end of college, I planned my honeymoon on the internet. And we were using AI Messenger to communicate with each other, even in the dorm, which would be like, a very old version of Slack. It was the first instant messaging.
Yeah.
And it was like completely dominant. But at that time, if I would have gone home, I was using it all the time. And yet most of the people that I had known and relatives and things like that were like, yeah, I know the internet's a thing, but I'm not paying to get that stupid AOL CD to load on my machine. And so, my parents didn't have a real computer, like one that would run the internet by the time I graduated. And so anyhow, so there's some very interesting things there that I see. There's some parallels. And that is both kind of hey, this is about to become a much bigger deal. But I would say to our audience, there's an interesting opportunity here, right? People who kind of figured out the internet thing earlier than everybody else were people who tended to be able to do some really interesting things. Let's just keep in mind that like a Mark Zuckerberg or, the people that started Google were people who were messing with the internet before most people knew what it was. So if you know what ChatGPT is and you're actually willing to play around with it, those who are willing to get familiar with AI now at some extent, are likely to reap outsized benefits in the very near future. So to all those out there who have young people that are technically interested, there's a lot of risks and there's a lot of dangers with AI, but there's a tremendous amount of opportunity right now. So that was the story that got my attention. In terms of opportunity, David, you've got an interesting one, maybe going slightly different direction. So tell us about that.
But Jonathan, I do want to play devil's advocate here for a second on that point, in that I feel like at least some of the things that you just told us about here could be said about just about anybody who is more on the enthusiast end or is just on the cutting edge of a technology that they're excited about. So whatever sort of technological fad might be a new thing. So, for example, somebody who's really excited about Google Glass 10 years ago when it first came out. So I would just be curious to know what your response would be to somebody who says, okay, but I think this is just a fad. I don't think this is something that's actually going to fully, be taken on and be a part of our everyday lives.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty valid question. I think there is some extent there. It's kind of strange. I didn't talk to him, but I saw across a crowded store a couple of days ago, a guy I worked with at the college that was doing programming and coding websites when that was all a very new thing. And we talked a lot and we worked together because I was director of marketing and those kinds of things. And so, and I didn't get a chance to talk to him because about the time I recognized who he was, I haven't seen him for 10 or 15 years. He left and I was like, oh, that's who that was. So I missed the opportunity. Anyhow, that kind of took me back to thinking about those times. And so there's two people there. and I would somewhat reluctantly put myself as one of them. But like, so this gentleman was somebody who was very into IT, very into computer science, learning to code and all those kinds of things. And he basically was able to write his check and work wherever he wanted, right? He was one of the few people that understood how the things worked when nobody understood how to make websites work. And he just knew the technical inside of it because he was an enthusiast, as you said, David. And so consequently, he was able to choose where he worked and kind of what he did because he was the wizard behind the curtain. Okay. And I think there's going to be some extent, there's going to be people like that in the AI space. And so that's one aspect of it. Mm-hmm. But I would say the other aspect was when I graduated and went to work, I was somebody who had just planned my honeymoon on the internet, who was using Instant Messenger all the time, who was very cognizant about websites and using them and all those kinds of things. And I entered a workspace where I was one of only 2 people that was actually doing that. Because everybody else had been there, had a lot of expertise in being admissions counselors, but had no ability to understand how the web worked and all those kinds of things. So I would say that I'm not an enthusiast. I wasn't highly technical. I didn't know how to code. And I wasn't like somebody who was just enthused about technology, but I was fluent in it. I was literate in it. And not entirely because of that, but with a large factor there. 2 years later, I was the director of admissions. So I graduated from college and became the director of admissions over all those people who were working there before. And to some extent, that was because I was able to grasp the impact of technology and how it was going to change. So while I never was able to technically use it, I was able to figure out how to hire people like this gentleman to make those things work. So that would be the other aspect of it. I think you're right to some extent. There's a special niche for people who are enthusiasts. But there's another niche for people who are wise enough to say, you know what, I should probably figure out how this thing works. And if you do, you're likely to find yourself in an office where you're the only one of a few people that knows how things go when everybody's going, wow, AI is having a big impact on us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then just from the perspective of someone who has been kind of the single technical person in a lot of areas, that even if you don't necessarily have a lot of in-depth hands-on experience with it, if you know enough to know what you don't know and you know where to go to get that knowledge, if you know how to learn, or as we say often in Unbound, quickly and effectively master complicated information in some of these specific areas, and you have a baseline to work from, that can allow you so many opportunities to get into positions that you would have otherwise would have never had the opportunity to.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, hey, thank you for watching this clip of the Alternative Ideas podcast. If you want to listen into the full episode of this podcast, then you can check it out on our YouTube channel here. And make sure that you're subscribed if you find it interesting, because every single week we release a new episode and we're going to be putting out new clips. So you can make sure to get those in your subscriptions box every week.